So, you just decided to become a YouTube content creator, or you want to try your hand on streaming here on Amazon, and you've upgraded your camera to something like a Sony a7 IV, Sony FX30, or even I would say even like a Panasonic S5 II, and you have a choice to make. So you know you need a lens, because a lot of these cameras are not going to come with a good quality lens, and the lenses that they do come with are not going to be ideal for a lot of talking head type videos, or if you're doing vlogging or blogging style content. And two of the lenses that I absolutely love in this space are going to be the Sony 20mm F1.8 G lens and the Sigma 16 to 28 millimeter f2.8 zoom lens. So should you go for this or that? Let's go. So when I started out as a content creator, I started filming on a Sony a6400. I used the kit lens for one video, then I upgraded to the Sigma 16 millimeter and then the 30 millimeter, and then I decided to get a real camera, and I got the Sony a7 IV. And I knew that most of my videos were going to be either handheld videos that let's say for vlogging, where I needed something like where I can be this close in front of the camera and it's going to be able to pick me up. And one of the reasons why that's important in two different cases, number one is if you're traveling, you're doing vlog or vlogging style content, you can't necessarily have the camera really far away from you. And the other one is I did a lot of trade show footage, and if there's one thing to know about trade show footage is that a lot of times, especially at the busier shows, if you don't have a dedicated media room, you'll stand the camera on there and people will walk in right in between the shot, and it's annoying. So for instance, right now I'm filming on a Panasonic S5 II with a 50mm f1.8 lens, and in order to kind of get this normal shot, the camera is 6 feet away from me. And if you set up a camera like that, if you set it like that at a trade show, people will be walking right through. Versus with a wide angle lens, you can literally have the camera somewhere like even like this close, and it'll be able to pick things up. So I knew I had to get a lens, and this was actually the first lens that I purchased, which was a Sony 20mm f1.8. So when you're buying Sony lenses, the F stands for, so if it's E, it's just for the crop sensors. If it says FE, it's for full frame crop sensors. So this lens has been my stable workhorse. I've used it for pretty much most of my YouTube videos. And now that we picked up the Sony FX30, which is a crop sensor, we use this camera, we use this full frame camera lens on this crop body camera as well, and it has been fantastic. One thing to note, so for example, if it's a 20mm and you're using it in a crop body, it's basically, you gotta multiply that by the crop factor, in this case 1.5, so it's gonna be the equivalent of, let's say, a 30mm lens, which is also really nice, beautiful for talking head style videos. So this lens, one of the things about it is that it is obviously a prime lens, meaning it's just 20 millimeters. If you want to zoom, you got to get closer and further away with your feet. That's how it works. Now, alternatively, you can zoom in post-processing, and you can basically crop in and crop out. The cool part is if, let's say, for example, you're recording in 4K, and then you're only exporting in 1080, well, you have room you can crop in there. Plus also the newer Sonys, they have what's called clear image zoom. So because it's an oversampled 4K, there is a little bit of space there where you can actually zoom. It's a digital zoom, but you're not going to be really losing a lot of quality. Now, it is a G lens, so what the G lens means is that Sony has three levels of lenses. We have the regular lenses, they have the G lenses, and they have the GM lenses, such as this 35mm GM. So GM stands for Gold Master, G stands for Gold. The one way you can tell the difference between them is on regular G lenses, it's just a black label. On the GM, it's a red label. So with the Gs, there's really no rhyme or reason in terms of what features you're getting, but it's kind of like your mid-level lenses. With this lens in particular, I mean, this really could be a GM level lens, but they made it 1.8, and I'm assuming for a GM they would want it to be, let's say, a f1.4 or something along those lines. But if you're doing vlog style content, you're generally not going to have it lower than 1.8 anyway, so it's definitely going to work out. And then if you're using it for street photography, things like that, you're going to use it at a sharper level. Anywho, this is one of Sony's sharpest lenses, fantastic lens, and it has GM level features. So you have your autofocus manual focus switch on there, and you do have your aperture ring, so you can set it manually. And for video shooters, if you do aperture pulls, you can declick it, and now it is super smooth, and you can do your aperture pulls without any clicks. So what this does is, if you're using it with the body, you can free up one of the dials that you would have on there. One note, however, that I do have to make sure to tell everybody is that if by accident you click it off the A and you set it to, let's say, f8, and you're trying to adjust the aperture on the camera, it's not going to adjust it on the camera. This is going to override it, so make sure this is on A if you're used to adjusting the aperture on the back of the camera with one of the dials. And then you do have one custom button which you can actually program right through the camera body itself. So overall, a fantastic lens. It is a 67 millimeter front Fred, which is actually one of the popular ones. The filters, I mean, they're not super huge, so the filters are going to be reasonable and a little bit cheaper, especially compared to the lens we're going to be comparing it to, which is the Sigma 16-28. So this is almost kind of like, Sigma does have a couple of primes, but this is the alternative that you'd be looking at. Now, if you're comparing, you're like, wait, this mount on the back looks a little different, and that's because this version of the 16-28 is actually the one that I'm using for the Panasonic Lumix, but it's the exact same lens for the Sony. So that's the one advantage. It's not a Sony lens, so Sigma, Tamron, they do make them for other manufacturers as well. So when you go to a zoom lens such as this, you can go from 16 to 28. When it comes to primes, so it's really going to depend on what your philosophy is behind it. If you want the widest, the fastest, or so basically a wider aperture, or what we consider a fast lens, primes are going to be the way to do it. Plus, there's less moving stuff, there's nothing zooming in and out, so it's better for gimbal work, things like that. However, there's obviously no zoom, and if this is your zoom, you got to move your camera in and out. Some people don't want to do that, or they don't want to carry extra lenses, things like that. So if you're looking, or you might not even have the budget to, let's say, for example, you need something that's going to be ultra wide for when you go to trade shows. You want to have something that's going to be wide for street photography or YouTube videos, and then you'd want to be able to zoom in a little bit for when you're doing talking head videos, let's say, for example, such as this. And basically for that reason, that's why I have the 20 millimeter f1.8. We have the 11 millimeter on here, which on a full frame is the equivalent of 16. And then I have a 35 millimeter GM. And yeah, I mean, taking 3 lenses with you, it is a little bit of choices, or you might not have the budget. So for those type of people, basically that's why people generally prefer to have a lens such as this. So this one in particular is from Sigma, so it's a 16-28. So it'll cover a number of different focus points. So 16 millimeters is going to be great for an ultra wide, for street, for landscapes, even for vlogging, because I mean, you'll be able to get your camera right in here in your face on a full frame. 20 millimeter we obviously have, and then it'll go up to 28 millimeters, which is great for talking head type videos. So very versatile lens. The downside to this lens, however, is that it's only an f2.8 instead of an f1.8, so it's a full stop slower. Meaning, if you're doing night photography, things like that, it's going to be okay, especially versus kit lenses, but it's not going to allow that much, it's not going to allow as much light as a prime lens would. And that's why this lens, the 20mm f1.8, is extremely popular even for astrophotography as well. The other downside is this lens is going to be a little bit bigger. So let's say, for example, if you want to do street photography, things like that, this is going to be a little bit more incognito, especially if you have it on a smaller body. When we attach it with hoods, you can basically, I mean, this one's a little bit wider, it's a little bit taller, it's a tiny little bit heavier. The construction on Sony does feel a little bit better. The other things you're not getting on this is you're not getting an aperture ring. So this is part of the contemporary series of lenses. It's not going to be, I would say, as weather sealed as this one. But the reasons why I even got this is, so the main pro is that it is internal zooming. So even though you can go from 16 to 28, the lens does not go in and out. And because we film a lot of our content outdoors or like in the desert in adverse conditions, I'm concerned about dust and stuff getting in, and that's why this lens is a fantastic lens for that money. So hopefully that kind of gives you some things to think about. I guess the one other note is that this uses 72mm filters versus this is 67, and so I did have to end up getting a new 67mm ND filter on these, and I've done separate videos on ND filters. So hopefully that kind of gives you the information that you need between going with a Sony G lens and a Sigma lens. Actually, one final note is if you're shooting it on a newer Sony body that has focus breathing compensation, it will support Sony lenses. It will not support third-party lenses, including Sigma. Although this one does actually do a really good job with controlling focus breathing, so that's why I kind of really didn't mention it, but it is going to be there. So hopefully that gives you the information you need in order to make up your mind between the Sony 20mm f1.8 and one of the lenses that's heavily compared to it and is going to be in your thought process, which is the Sigma 16 to 28 f2.8. As always, I hope you found this valuable, and I will see you in the next video.